Hi, I'm Frank Massiosi, and I'm here today with Lindsay Schambach, who is the Executive Director of Imagine. Many of you have not heard of Imagine. You're going to hear all about it. A very, very interesting and I think unusual organization. So, Lindsay, for the viewers, please tell us, what is Imagine?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And Imagine is an organization that is very near and dear to my heart. We are a family bereavement center. So we provide peer to peer grief support for children as young as 3 years old up to 18. We provide support for young adults as well as the caregivers of all of these young people. And everyone who comes to Imagine has suffered a loss due to death. It's truly a community-based organization that takes the opportunity to give those who are grieving a community of people who can be a witness to their experience of loss, with the hope that we are preventing all of the tragedies that can come along with unsupported and unresolved grief. So that's truly what we are. We provide year-round grief support to our children and families, in addition to education, advocacy, and awareness building.
Wow, this sounds a little bit like therapy, but I think it's different. Is
Yes,
it?
yes, it is different. One of the main reasons it's different is that we say that grief, although it's very painful, it's also natural and normal. So if you love something and you lose it, you are going to grieve that loss. So at Imagine, we know that what our families need to support themselves throughout this loss is the opportunity to grieve in a safe space with people who understand their loss. So Imagine is not therapy, although many of our families also seek therapy. What they can't get at therapy is they can't get peer support. And the opportunity for children to be with other children who know and understand their loss, who have walked in similar shoes, is a gift that I feel so proud to be able to give to our community.
So you you must have a staff that
Thank
assists you in
goodness.
this.
We do. We have an amazing team. We have quite a few clinical-based social workers, child life specialists who are on staff. But our nights of support model, that's what we call our evenings, our nights of support, are run by our amazing and dedicated volunteers. So each of our peer-to-peer support groups are run by 2 or more volunteers. And these volunteers go through a 3-day training period where they learn the myths and the truths about grief. They learn one of my favorite lessons is that when someone is grieving, that nothing actually needs to be fixed, that the person is doing what they are biologically wired to do, which is to grieve and to mourn. And so many of us in the common everyday society believe that with grief, our job is to make the person feel better or to take their pain away. But when a child loves someone and loses someone, it's going to be painful. And the expression of that is what we call grief and mourning. It's all those feelings that they feel. And so the gift that our facilitators give is that all of the child's feelings are valid and welcome at Imagine. They get to talk about the person who has died. They get to share their memories. They get to say that they maybe feel guilty, or maybe they're struggling feeling joy again, or maybe some days they're just totally fine.
Hmm.
And that can come with all kinds of feelings. So Imagine is run by our volunteer facilitators, and every night it's overseen by one of our clinical staff members. And they're there just to ensure that our volunteers have guidance and leadership as it comes to supporting children and families who are grieving. And then our staff does a whole host of other things. So we think about our model in direct service to our grieving families, but we also know that not every child in the state who's grieving will end up at one of our centers. And so we've built out what we call our Grief Informed Schools initiative. And in that model, we go into schools, and this is our clinical staff who provide training and education to all those caring, loving educators in schools who want to do what's best for children. And so we spend a lot of our time in school partnerships, training administrators, mental health professionals, teachers, parents, and then children themselves. And we find that our children really want to talk about grief. They've experienced friends who are grieving, they themselves are grieving, they've witnessed their parents who are grieving. They're experiencing all kinds of losses. And so when we go into classrooms and we open the door to talk about grief and loss, our kids are active and ready participants in that conversation.
More so than adults?
Way more so than
Yeah,
adults.
interesting.
Yes.
Tell me the age range again.
At our center, we support children as young as 3
Yeah.
up to 18.
Okay.
And then we have a young adult program for up to 30-year-olds.
Okay.
And then all their caregivers. And so we have wonderful grandparents who are now the primary caregiver because their own children have died and now they're taking care of their grandchildren.
Okay.
So they're in our groups. We have mothers and fathers who have experienced the death of a child, and they go to an adult support group for adults who've experienced the death.
But it's only up to age 30, you said.
For our children, yes, we think about it up to age 30.
So,
And then the caregivers of those children. Imagine right now is working on polling every single phone call that comes in for support. And one of the things that we want to make sure we're always doing is being really responsive to our community. So we will grow and expand to the needs of our community if we see that there is this need in this space. We were born out of the idea that most of the time our children are our neglected or forgotten mourners.
okay.
Everyone reaches out to the parents to make sure the parents are okay, but our kids, most people assume they'll be fine. We know that our kids with unresolved grief and stories that are untold, they translate into depression, anxiety, fear, lack of self-esteem, poor academic performance. But now our culture is beginning to intervene for our children, and Imagine is one of those main ways that we intervene. So yes, people over 30 definitely grieve, without a doubt. And Imagine is expanding our services to make sure that we figure out who those populations are. One of the most important programs that will begin to open is people who've experienced death due to suicide. That can come with a lot of stigma, a lot of fear about talking about those deaths, and we want to remove that barrier so that our families can grieve and mourn more openly. So this upcoming year, we'll be piloting that program and hopefully expanding to a full night of support for families who've had a death due to suicide.
Okay. The population that you serve geographically?
Yeah, we serve families from 80 different towns.
Wow.
It's a pretty wide net across our state. So we have families that travel almost an hour and 20 minutes to drive to our center. It's a beautiful thing. We serve many of our families in Union County, but we also have families from Essex, Morris, Sussex. Hudson County are driving to us, even Ocean County. Okay. So it's been a beautiful thing, and I think there's something really wonderful about our families getting to know people all over the state and realizing that they're truly not alone.
Your headquarters is Mountainside?
Yes.
But
yes.
You have told me that you've recently expanded into Newark.
Yes. In 2019, Imagine was receiving quite a lot of phone calls for support for our Newark community. And we've been lucky enough to partner with the Southward Promise neighborhood, forgive me. And they've been our partners since 2019. And so we opened our doors at Beth Israel Wellness Center in 2019. And then unfortunately during COVID, we closed our services, but served our families virtually. And so since then, we've been working to make sure that in the city of Newark, there is truly a space for grief. And just January, we signed our first lease. And so we feel so honored to be home, 4,000 square feet for our kids and families in the city of Newark who are grieving.
Okay. So this is a rather unusual calling. What got you into this? Your educational background or personal circumstances?
Well, in by trade, by education, by my work, I was a teacher in the city of Newark for many years. I have loved every minute of serving the city of Newark. And in my first year of teaching, my father was diagnosed with stage 4 brain tumor, glioblastoma. And he passed pretty quickly into my time as a teacher. And the city of Newark drove all the way out to my hometown of Bridgewater. Many of my students who I had just started teaching and many of the teachers at that school, and they stood by me during my time of mourning.
And how old were you?
I was 21.
Okay.
I had a 16-year-old brother, a 20-year-old sister, and a 24-year-old brother. And so we were kids, teens, young adults who were grieving. And many of us, we kind of threw ourselves back in. We were very lucky. We had a wonderful support network around us. And I dedicated my career to the city of Newark. I became a principal. I founded a charter school. I had a wonderful experience with all of my children. And then in 2017, my own husband was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And he passed about 9 months, 10 months after his diagnosis. And I had a 4-year-old son and a 4-week-old daughter.
Wow.
And a good friend mentioned Imagine. And so I used Imagine's services for my own children at the time in 2018. And I saw it as one of the greatest gifts that I had during my time of mourning. I didn't know another 34 or 35-year-old widow at the time. My son, who was 4 years old, didn't know any other children whose parents had died. But when he walked through the doors of Imagine, he was surrounded by a whole bunch of children who just understood it and got it. So our beautiful founder, Mary Robinson, in 2021 was stepping down from the role of executive director, and I was lucky enough to find myself interviewing and honored to be walking in her footsteps and leading this organization now.
That's a truly remarkable story. So you've been, 2021 was when you took this position.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been several years. There are other similar organizations around, but not many, right?
There's not enough, I would say. There is a wonderful organization called the JAG Institute and Judy's House, and they study childhood bereavement. In the state of New Jersey, the childhood bereavement estimator says that 1 out of every 12 children in New Jersey will experience the death of a parent or a sibling before they turn 18. In New Jersey, we are one of the lucky states. We have 4 grief support centers across our state. We all follow very similar models of peer-to-peer support, but 1 out of every 12 means that there's grieving children in every classroom, in every school, in every county. And if families have to drive an hour and 20 minutes to get to us, we know that there are grieving families that just aren't making that trip. So we truly believe in our field that there should be 1 in every county for our children to be able to have choice and to find a grief bereavement center that supports that family. So we're very lucky to have partners across this state as well as nationally. There's an association called the National Association of Children's Grief that does wonderful work in many different states, and you can use their website to find grief support centers near you. And many of us are founded off of the first ever family bereavement center out in Portland, Oregon, which opened in the 1980s, called the Dougie Center. And my staff went out to go visit the Dougie Center last summer just to make sure that we were continuing to be tried and true with our best practices as we support families who are grieving.
You counsel a wide range of ages of kids. And I'm guessing that the little ones grieve much differently from the big ones, and you deal with them much differently. Could you elaborate on the differences?
Yeah. On our night of support, we have quite a few groups that all run simultaneously. So our night could have up to 90 participants there. And our 3 to 5-year-olds go to group with 3 to 5-year-olds. Our 6 to 9-year-olds go to our 6 to 9-year-old group. We have a preteen group, a teenage group, and then our young adults and our adults. And one of the things that our 3 to 5-year-olds do is they process their grief through play. They truly play with one another all night long in our sand zone, in our home zone, in our make-believe. And our kids in that group go through grief activities each night where they get an opportunity to share memories or play their favorite game that they played. And so at Imagine, we use the term that we open doors. So at Imagine, you never have to do any of the grief activities that we offer, but we open doors for children. We give them the opportunity to do these things, to mourn the person who died. And one of those for our young kids is just to play. Our 3 to 5-year-olds take the opportunity to play in 2 of our therapeutic play spaces at our centers. One is a hospital room. Our hospital room, for most adults, can be hard to even imagine playing in, but our children truly love it. It's an opportunity for them to either repair. They might have been in the hospital, they might have experienced a death in the hospital, or they might never have gotten to be in the hospital. So they can play in that space, and they play the patient, they play the doctor, Sometimes they save the person, sometimes they don't. But that is truly the way that our youngest ones grieve. We also know that their understanding of death is not yet permanent. So our 3 to 5 year olds might need to be reminded regularly. They might ask, where is he again? Where is she again? Oh, that's right. Or how did she die again? I don't really remember. And that's all very normal and common for 3 to 5 year olds. Our 6 to 9 year olds is our largest group. It's the reason that Imagine runs a wait list, because it is the time when so many caregivers decide to get support for their children. And what we see in 6 to 9 year olds is that they have what we would consider magical thinking. Either that they unfortunately feel as though they might have caused the death, or that they should have been able to prevent it. So at times they were unfortunately talking in the car, or they got in an argument with the person who died. Or we have children who unfortunately have seen the death and thought that they should have been able to do CPR, or should have been able to tell the person not to go where they were going. And so our 6 to 9 year olds are processing a lot of that grief with each other. And they do that through play, and they also do it through our grief activities. What's the last thing you said? What's your last memory of the person who died? And so we find that our 6 to 9 year olds truly support each other. One of the most beautiful things I love about Imagine is that a child can come to Imagine and stay as long as they want. So we have children who've been coming for 5+ years, who started in our youngest group and are now the leaders of our 6 to 9 year old group. And the beauty of that is that they become mentors to the younger children who have just experienced the death. They help each other through, and their loss becomes something that they get to support other people because of their experiences, which can lead for our children to post-traumatic growth, the opportunity to see themselves as someone who supports other people, not just someone who seeks or needs support themselves. So that's our 6 to 9 year old group. And then our teens, although many people say that our teens, that they are quiet and that they don't talk, the beauty of our model is that they never have to talk. And by taking away that pressure, that their story is their own story and that no one is entitled to it, our children get the choice about when they want to share their story.
And there's some who opt not to talk.
We have heard from our teens that sometimes they learn more just from listening to each other, and that is like such an empowering thing, just to be the listener. So our teens do talk quite a lot. We have activities for them each night, and our beautiful facilitators are so special who create space for our teens. And our teens have been coming for many, many years. And many of our teens transition into our young adult program. As they head off to college, as there's less structure, as there's less safety and security, it's incredibly important to support our 17-year-olds when they become freshmen and sophomores and juniors in college, when they have the opportunity to access a lot of both positive and negative choices. Their ties back to Imagine, we have seen, help them transition in a very healthy and positive way.
Wow.
So children's grief looks very different across the ages, and I think that's the beauty of our center, is that our children get exposed to people of all ages who are grieving. They get to see their parents in opening circle share the name of the person who died, and they get to see their parents go and get grief support. And many of our parents say that their favorite time of the week is the drive home from Imagine, because their children talk so much because of the exposure to other children who are just like them.
Now, you mentioned a wait list. There's actually a wait list to get in. It's like getting into college.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the type of place that you never wanted to have to go, but once our kids come, they never want to leave. We hear from parents that our children come every other week, and so when it's not their week, our children are often saying, is it Imagine's week? How come I can't go to Imagine tonight? So in November, we opened another night of support to support 90 more participants, and that night is now full. So this September, we'll be opening another night. So our center is just about used every single evening.
Wow.
And the reason we run wait lists is, unfortunately, we have to train volunteers, recruit volunteers, make sure we have staff for those nights of support. But we feel confident with the support of our community that we'll be able to do it this September.
Now, if somebody is watching this show and they want to get in touch with you, they have a child in need or whatever,
Yes.
How do they do that?
Our website is a very easy place to go. That's imaginenj.org. And there are forms online, or they can call our staff from 9 to 5 o'clock. Our staff is there. They answer the phone. And we receive phone calls on all types of questions. We receive phone calls at the moment of diagnosis. How do I talk to my children about this loss? At Imagine, we always say that grief begins at the moment of diagnosis, and that families and parents should not wait to think about how to support their children. That grief will come right at that moment when an illness occurs or a diagnosis occurs within your family, that your children might need support, and that the skills of supporting them after death are the same skills that you can utilize when a diagnosis occurs.
Now, is there a cost to parents for this service?
I'm glad you mentioned it because there's no cost.
No cost.
No, most of the time people think, okay, so when do I pay? Do I have to have insurance? But we are 100% a free center for families as long as they want to be here.
That's truly, truly incredible. I'm sure you have many generous donors.
We do.
Not just parents, but institutions and so forth.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. We are supported by quite a lot by the generosity of our community, many individual supporters, as well as many foundations. So a lot of people are beginning to understand that grief and the ability to support those who are grieving is truly a preventative action. And I almost believe that it's a right. Like, you should be able to grieve in a safe space. And we can't expect that that happens at school or with individual therapy, that it is a responsibility of our community to create spaces like this for children and families.
You mentioned volunteers several times. Are you taking new volunteers?
We are. Always,
Okay.
always, always.
Okay.
Yes.
And you said did you say 3-day training?
It's a 3-day training, yes. Most volunteer jobs, people will say, what do you mean I need to go through a training for it? But this is a gift that we provide for the community, but it also requires a level of skill, and we provide supervision for our volunteers. So each night as our doors open, our volunteers are in what we consider pre-group. And that's a 45-minute block of time where they meet with our staff and they go over the activity of the night, and our staff models all the skills that our volunteers utilize with our groups each night. And then when our families go home, our volunteers come back together. And it's one of the important kind of missing elements in most service-related industries is caring for our volunteers. And so if you could imagine, you might be a volunteer hearing about a death, and there can be a lot of transference that occurs in that. So when our families go home for the night, our volunteers anonymously share breakthroughs and successes that our families had, but also the hardship that they heard about in groups. And the reason we do that is, one, so that our volunteers can go home to their families without carrying that same story and without feeling like they need to share it at home. And two, we provide support to them to let them know how they handled the situation, what it was like, and just a reminder that if a family shared some really difficult stuff in group, that was a gift that you gave to that family. And it's a beautiful thing that the family was able to share that. Most of the time, even our volunteers want to fix it and they want to take the pain away. And so our staff is there to remind them that your job was to just sit there with the family as they were in pain, because most grieving families just want their pain to be witnessed. They want someone to listen.
What's the number of staff?
12 staff
12
members.
staff.
Yes, and 100 volunteers.
Okay, I was going to say must be more volunteers than
100
staff.
volunteers.
Wow,
Yes.
that is a lot of volunteers.
Yes. We also run a teen volunteer program. It is such a special gift to have 14 to 17-year-olds. Most of them are high school students, 14 to 17, 14 to 18. And they go through a one-day training. And our volunteers our teen volunteers are in our youngest groups, so with our 3 to 5-year-olds or our 6 to 9-year-olds. And to our youngest kids, our teens seem very old. But they are such a beautiful addition that many times our children find that they gravitate towards the teens. And our teens interact in pre-group and post-group with some of the most profound statements, realizing what culture is like and what our children are like. And I think our teens understand many times what our children need. They're not struggling with that parent hat or that professional hat. They just show up as fully human. And our kids really gravitate towards our teens.
Now, you have an annual event. I know you wanted to mention it. So happens that as we sit here, the event is coming up soon.
Yes.
But it's annual, so
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. Every May, we are so lucky to host this amazing event called Greta's Run. And I always say that Greta's Run is one of the most beautiful community acts of mourning. It was born out of the tragic loss of a beautiful young girl named Greta Schoenemann. And Greta was 13 years old in Westfield back in 2002. and she tragically passed away. Her classmates 10 years later decided that they wanted to do something in her honor, and they started Greta's Run. So her classmates and her family carried this run on for many years, and during COVID, it just got to be too big. And we were lucky enough to be the organization that inherited Greta's Run. So we carry Greta's Run on every year in honor of everyone in our lives who have died. People come out and they run for people of all ages, grandparents who have passed, mothers and fathers who have passed, young children who have passed. And it doesn't matter whether it was illness, disease, accidental, we all come together and realize that no matter what our loss is, it deserves to be shared and their legacy deserves to be carried on. So this year it happens to be on May 19th. It's usually that Sunday, and it begins with a 5K, a children's fun run, and then we do a 1-mile memory walk in honor of everyone in our lives who have died.
And where is this?
This takes place in Westfield at Roosevelt School.
Okay.
And it brings out almost 1,200, 1,300 people this year. And we have a concert, and it is like truly one of the most beautiful days to help our children just normalize their loss and to see that everyone can grieve, and that joy and grief can be right there next to each other. So there are hugs and friendships and laughter and kids running and music being played, and there are families who are grieving all in the middle of that.
Wow.
And I find that this is just such an active representation of our entire community. Everyone comes out, and we would love to have other people participate in this with us. I think it's a gift to give to the next generations to realize that we can talk about our losses and we can live a beautiful life around them and for the people who have passed before us.
Okay, wow. This has been a very interesting conversation. I think we could talk for another half an hour with all the questions that occur to me. It's a wonderful thing that you and your staff and all your volunteers are doing, so thank you for that. And thank you for watching, and if you'd like to know more about Imagine, please visit their website.